Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Friend Show. I am joined today by Mr. Marius Roodt. Marius, how are you doing?
How's it, Nick? Nice to be here.
Good to have you with us. We also have John Endres, CEO of the Institute of Race Relations. John, how are you?
Very well, thanks, Nick. Good to be here.
Very good to have you with us. Right, let's get into the news stories of today, and we will cover a little bit of the VAT defeat that we talked about on the show briefly yesterday. But first, we've got to talk about this great piece that was on News 24. It's titled SA Speaks, Less Than Half of South Africans Think Government Should Keep BEE Growing. Now, this is based off of News 24 hired the polling company IPSOS to do a survey of South Africans on their attitudes towards Black economic empowerment. And they found that it's really not as popular as some politicians would have you believe. 11, according to the Ipsos survey that they did, 11 out of every 25 South Africans believe government should keep BEE going, whereas 9 out of every 25, over a third of the population, believe government should end all BEE policies, while a very significant number do not have an opinion. They don't know. They're sort of on the fence. So that's, according to their survey, 36% for end BEE, 44% for keep enforcing, and 20% don't know. Among Black respondents, 46% believe to continue BEE, 32% said to end BEE, and 22% said don't know. What's quite interesting, however, is if you kind of dig into some of the other questions they asked, for example, do you agree that BEE policies are slowing down economic growth in South Africa? 46% agreed, whereas 24% disagreed, and 29% had no view or were unsure. When they asked whether BEE policies are outdated and divisive, 41% said agree, 27% said total disagree, and 32% had no viewpoint or were unsure. They were sort of neutral. Among the political parties, the most anti-BEE are people who support the Free Front Plus. The DA and Action SA are kind of in second place. The EFF and ANC, unsurprisingly, and MK, of course, have their supporters tend to be more in favor of BEE, but not by huge amounts. I mean, on the question of outdated and divisive, 30% of ANC supporters say that it isn't outdated and divisive, but 36% say that it is. The analyst who's from Ipsos, who was quoted in the News 24 story, said, as found in studies undertaken since the early 1990s, unemployment and the lack of job creation are seen as the perpetual biggest challenges in the country. South Africans also agree that qualifications and ability are the most important aspects when it comes to employment, and at the same time, they lament the non-delivery of services on many levels. So, John, I think for us who have been banging our spoon on our high chair for a long time about these exact the sort of stats, the direction of public opinion, this is somewhat some vindication. I think there's been a tendency from some analysts to write off our polling, which we've done for years now on these issues, as this is just propaganda by those evil right-wing think tanks who are trying to destroy transformation or something. And yet, while this survey definitely has results that are more favorable towards BEE than our survey suggest, the bottom line is that there is not even close to a consensus, even among Black South Africans, that BEE is the way to go. What's your take on this?
Well, I think at the outset we can say that certainly we don't think it is the way to go, and we haven't thought so for a long time. So we think BEE, should be scrapped ultimately. But what I found very interesting about this moment in time where we find ourselves is that we see the government ratcheting up its racial policies, like, for example, the employment equity regulations, which have just been, tightened up, and the threat of penalties and fines imposed on companies that don't meet these targets. We see it also in the Public Procurement Act, which has also got, more set-asides for specially designated groups, including racial groups. So it might look as if racial policy is, just becoming more and more popular, more and more entrenched. But at the same time, looking at these polling numbers, looking at support for the parties that support race-based policies, I wonder if it is not time to stick our necks out and say this is now a walking dead policy. BEE is actually a policy that is soon going to be a thing of the past. It is still stumbling along with its hands outstretched before it, but we're going to see it go the way of the dodo before long. I don't think that realization is quite sunk in the political class, certainly not in the ANC, also not in the EFF. And to some extent, I even wonder if the DA is aware of this. So, the DA is sort of going quite softly on race-based policy since it joined the GNU, maybe to keep the peace, maybe because it thinks it doesn't really have a strong case to call for its scrapping. But what these numbers tell us, from IPSOS, from our own polling, is that there's actually not that much popular support for BEE race-based policies, and ultimately political parties don't need to keep selling them if they want to get votes. They can step away from these policies quite safely and probably even find vindication if they're able to demonstrate higher levels of economic growth resulting from more merit-based appointments rather than race-based appointments. So this kind of favoritism has played out over the last 30 years. It's created a class of beneficiaries which will adamantly defend the policies, but it has locked out quite a large share of the population, including the black population, who are clamoring for a better solution. Nick.
Exactly right. Marius, there's a number of different aspects to this. One is, I think it's just interesting that you're seeing a big news organization like News 24 actually sort of tackling this question head on and very directly, which I think is a change in the environment from years past. But also that, there's this sort of narrative that different racial groups in South Africa are sort of on wildly different pages on a whole bunch of issues. But in many of the polls that we've done, but also in this poll, there's actually far more consensus among South Africans of all sort of races, economic groups, etc., than one might expect when looking at our politics on a surface level. What's your take on this?
Yeah, I think you're right. The zeitgeist is changing. I think there is a kind of pushback against BE, or at least now a willingness to question the policy, which I think maybe 10 or even 5 years ago we wouldn't have seen this. Just being able to question it. As I say, News 24 is probably the biggest website in South Africa at the moment, or news website, and they released, as you point out, something questioning this whole thing. But what we also have to ask. I think, as Thomas Sowell said, you mustn't look at a policy on its intentions, but on its outcomes. And since for 20 years, South Africa has been stagnating. We've had low economic growth. We've had employment rising. Our per capita incomes are about the same as they were in 2007. So things have really gone backwards. And BE was, I think, at first was introduced in 2000, and now we just keep getting ramped up. And we've seen now with these racial quotas and all that kind of thing, it's not working. Unemployment's gone up, and the group of people that suffer for the most from unemployment are Black South Africans. I think on the expanded definition, more than half of Black South Africans are unemployed, and that's absolutely shocking. And I've said before on the show, we must always remember that we can look at these numbers and we can say, "Oh, geez, that's terrible." But behind each of those figures, there's a real person who is now stressed about money, can't put food on the table, is very worried about the future. So that's one person times that anxiety and so on by however much, I don't know what the numbers off the top of my head, I think it's 14 or 15 million people are unemployed. It's a human disaster. And that's what we've got to remember. And at the same time, it's ridiculous to say that all Black South Africans are still disadvantaged 30 years after the end of apartheid. Of course, most disadvantaged South Africans are Black people. That's we don't have to debate that. But should somebody who's been to a private school, went to UCT or WITS or whatever the case is, got a good degree, is working in a corporate, or is or has got a good job, or is running a successful business, is that person still disadvantaged just because they are Black? I think it's actually quite racist and quite demeaning to say you are still disadvantaged, even if you're earning 2 million rand a year and you live in a 5-bedroom house and you got 3 cars and all your kids are in private school. I think it's incredibly racist to say that person is still disadvantaged. And us at the Institute of Racial Relations have obviously spoken about replacing BE with something, the economic empowerment for the disadvantaged, where we'd still have economic empowerment, but for people who are actually disadvantaged, not because they're Black. And the vast majority of people who would benefit from this policy would still be Black South Africans.
Exactly, taking the race out of it so that you don't have this sort of group of people who have kind of already made it in the economy, using BE as a way to benefit themselves. That sort
And
of
the
politically
best way to
connected
empower
elite.
Black South Africans, sorry to interrupt, the best way to empower Black South Africans is to get the economy growing at 5 or 6% a year. You don't need these racial preferencing and these weird regulations. If South Africa was growing at 5% a year and we didn't have any race-based policies, Black South Africans and everybody, but Black South Africans in particular, would be much, much better off than they are today.
Exactly right. John, just on my point earlier, I was making about sort of consensus across racial lines. It's far stronger. In people identified in this survey as white, 57% said NBE, but 36% said continue BE. That's only 10 points different from the number of Black South Africans who said to continue BE. And NBE was much less popular in the survey amongst Black South Africans. But I think this is kind of one of those great moments when you just sort of see just that South Africa has a far more sort of, I think, unified sort of political mindset actually than many people realize. Most South Africans, by and large, are sort of conservative in the sense that they don't like radicalism that much. They are sort of tired of racialization and racial fights, and they are, at least interested in the possibility that there is another way of doing things than the way we've been doing things for the past 20, 30 years.
I was talking earlier this morning to Mike Sham, who runs the State of the Nation podcast, and he made such a great point, which was that he said, if you left school in 2008 or any year since 2008 in South Africa, you've never experienced what it's like to be in a high-growing economy, a fast-growing economy. So you don't actually know what you're missing. Yeah, it's true for you, definitely. And
I left school
he says,
in 2011.
Exactly. And he had a similar experience. So he I think like the first 10 or 15 years of his working life, there was no economic growth. And then he came the mid-2000s and he experienced high economic growth. And he said it was mind-blowing. He said he couldn't believe what a difference it made. In terms of sentiment, you've got the sense of dynamism, of excitement, of things happening, of forward momentum, of things getting better. Seeing construction cranes dotting the horizon, seeing new infrastructure being built, having the sense that there's economic opportunities for you that you can sort of hustle and find an opportunity to make something of your life. And that entire spirit is missing at the moment. And when we see sort of a lot of don't knows and the answers, or sort of supporters of BE who both support it but recognize that it slows down economic growth, I think that reflects the fact that they don't know what they're missing. So they think, this is the framework that we've grown up with. It's all around us. That's all that exists. So probably it has to continue existing, or maybe not, but we're not quite sure. That's because the alternative isn't clear. And that is what we're trying to communicate through the IRR, is to say, higher economic growth rate is absolutely transformative for a country. If you can get the economy growing, people will just have so much more opportunity of whatever race they are. And that is what we want to get the country moving towards.
All right, let's move on to our next story. And this is your thoughts on the defeat of the VAT increase. Yesterday we saw I think at the very early hours of the day before, but anyway, we saw the withdrawal of the VAT increase, and that's still going to work its way through Parliament, but basically the ANC has backtracked on it, along with the small parties who were supporting it. The DA and EFF immediately claimed victory. I see also today MK, Floyd Shivambu, has declared that the reason that VAT didn't pass was because of MK. And it's kind of been remarkable in the past couple of hours to see everyone sort of try to claim that it was actually them who defeated VAT. The most hilarious of those being the ANC, who sort of have been talking about how they are what is it, Fikile Mbalula said, the working class are our primary motive force that propel our national democratic revolution. And sort of almost trying to make it seem like, they were the ones who ultimately made the great decision to scrap the VAT thing. And it turns out that in the end, no one was for VAT, strangely enough. John, let me start with you again. What do you think the state of play is here? I know the DA has been saying that it was their court action that looked to sink these things. And from the reporting I've seen, that seems to kind of align with my view. but what's your takeaway on who the winners are of this fight and who the losers are?
So I think it's important to set out at the beginning that this is a mess entirely of the ANC's own making. And what really caused the problem was a lack of coordination between the political sphere and the technocratic sphere. So in the past, you could rely on Treasury to get everything perfectly shipshape in time for the budget speech. The finance minister would just have to read it out. The cabinet would applaud. The ANC majority would vote to pass it. And that smooth machine doesn't quite exist in the same form anymore because the ANC doesn't have a majority. But that is where it really fell down, is that they needed to realize, okay, our technocratic part is still going to work. The Treasury is fine. They still produce a beautiful budget where all the numbers tie up correctly and there's no spelling mistakes and the graphics look great. That all works. But the political part, we actually need to sort out. We have to make sure that we've got the votes to pass the budget. And that wasn't done. So that's where this whole problem comes from. Now, in terms of winners and losers, I think the ANC is going to be a loser out of this because they were responsible for creating the mess. And it's going to be hard to spin their way out of it, even though they're trying. But I don't think really many people are going to buy it. One of the losers out of it is going to be South Africa's reputation and even its credit worthiness, I suspect. And the reason here is that one of the reasons that South Africa was respected as an investment destination, despite its many failings, was because of the high quality of work done by the Treasury. And so investors could be sure that the money was being handled professionally and safely through budgetary processes, etc. But now this debacle casts question marks over that. Now people are going to say, well, if they sort of forget that they need a majority to pass a budget and they table one budget and then cancel the first presentation, then table another one, then pass the fiscal framework by going behind the backs of their coalition partner, then have to withdraw that. What a huge mess this is. This looks completely unprofessional and untrustworthy. So if we're going to be, come out of this nicely, it is going to take some sort of reset in the relationship. I think the ANC has to recognize its position as the largest, but not a sole dominant party in the government. It has to take on board other parties. I think if it brings in the small parties and kicks out the DA, it's in for a world of pain because it'll have to negotiate every single bit, and every 2-bit player is going to make their demands, for compliance and for their votes. That's going to be very painful. The best option, I think, for the ANC and for the DA is actually for those two parties to sit together at a table and say, okay, right, the first 9 months have been not as great as we'd hoped. DA got a bit railroaded at the beginning, then put its foot down, caused a fair bit of disruption. How do we make these things work a bit more smoothly in future? But let's work it out, because these are actually the two parties that can, I think, put together a coalition that works. Nick?
So, Marius, your thoughts on this in general, what you think the future of the GNU might be, but also the thing that sort of struck me about all this is just the sheer kind of bloody-mindedness of the ANC from a sort of strategic point of view, that it just kind of kept trying to bludgeon its way through the entire spectacle, even as it was bleeding support, even as these surveys came out that showed it wasn't in a great place, even as parties who, were supposed to be supporting this thing defected from supporting it. It kind of almost seemed up until the last minute like they really thought that, this was going to work, and that it would be some sort of great political win for the party to push through a highly unpopular VAT tax increase. I don't know. It's just kind of bizarre, and I think it speaks to the party's lack of strategic ability right now. What's your take, Marius?
Yeah, I think the party's become pretty ossified. They've become used to being the biggest party, and that's why they're not thinking of other ways of doing things. We can save money in other ways, and if you want to get more taxes, grow the economy. It's pretty simple. But at least they know that they can't raise corporate tax and personal income tax anymore, even though they did sort of, by not adjusting the income tax brackets. But it also feels like we're living in George Orwell's 1984. Because when they did pass the VAT increase in the first place, there was ululating. Gator McKenzie was dancing and saying, "We've done this. This is amazing. Stupid DA. What a bunch of idiots." And now, we've always been against this. What are you talking about? We were opposed to this from the beginning. Are you people mad? It's such an example of gaslighting. It's actually disgusting, to be honest with you. And even with Action SA as well, they're trying to do all like pulling the wool over our eyes. It's completely ridiculous. But on the future of the GNU, I think John's right. If they do kick up the DA, the ANC is going to have a very difficult time. And I don't think there's much appetite in the current leadership to bring in people like MK or the EFF. I think things will be even more chaotic. But there was quite an interesting piece by Anthony Butler in Business Live this morning. He's a professor at UCT, politics professor, and he said, this kind of thing often happens in coalitions. The parties will be saying, these guys are a bunch of morons, what a bunch of idiots. But behind the scenes, they're saying, look, guys, let's come to an agreement, because they obviously want to show their supporters that they are opposed to this terrible policy, even though maybe behind the scenes, like, yes, let's push it, or the coalition partners will try to take the credit for the good things and try distance themselves from the bad things and so on. And so there'll be, it happens all around the world. Coalition partners scream at each other in public, but behind, things are a little bit more cordial. And it does seem that things are also a little bit more cordial behind the scenes, although Helen Ziller, I think, was quite scathing of the ANC. And I think it all comes down to that the ANC still thinks it's a 60% party. It hasn't accepted reality. It's still in the denial stage of grief, I think. And it's going to have to start learning things soon, because if you look at, definitely the polling that the Social Research Foundation and what we've done has shown that it's quite possible that in 2029, the DA will be the single biggest party in South Africa. And that'll be, that will really change our politics fundamentally. The DA will be able to call the shots. And while I'm not saying the DA is perfect, obviously, I think they might be easier, easier coalition partner to work with. So things are changing quickly, and I don't think the ANCs realize that. They still think they are this massive juggernaut that can do whatever they want, and that's certainly not the case anymore. Look what happened in KZN. They were getting over 60% of the vote 2 elections ago. Now they don't even get 20%, and they're a junior partner in a coalition government. And that's going to happen very soon at national level too if the ANC is not careful.
Yeah, that for me is ultimately the most bizarre thing about all of this. It's kind of that the ANC thought that they would be immune from the political consequences from their own supporters for this VAT increase. And I think, if anything, the 2024 elections showed that the ANC is not immune. And its entire theory of the case as to why it's losing doesn't make any sense, because according to the ANC's own version of the story, there was this bit of trouble with the Zuma stuff, but ultimately, we're on the right track and we've done all these great things to improve the country. I don't think they have an explanation for why they're losing at the moment, and I think that's one of the reasons why they just sort of seem to be flailing in the wind as to try and respond to these political developments. South Africa's politics is becoming much more like any other normal democracy, where issues are debated and parties are punished, depending on their performance. People rally behind a whole variety of identities. You don't have this grand liberation juggernaut that just sort of eats up the entire political space. And as the ANC still thinks that it's almost like immune from the rules of normal politics. John, final thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's as you say, they haven't quite cottoned on yet to where things are going. But the opportunity is there. I think this ANCDA collab is probably the best chance that the country's got. I see some skepticism in the comments, understandably so. But I think it probably is the best combo that we're going to get.
All right, let's move on to our last story, which is about the heating up internal battle between the ANC's potential next leaders, in this case, Paul Mashatile and Fikile Mbalula. And there was a story that came out, I think, on Easter Sunday, that Paul Mashatile seemed to have claimed that he was the target of an attempted assassination when he said that some bullets hit his motorcade after an ANC meeting while he was driving on the highway. A lot of people in the ANC seem to kind of downplay this, though. His potential main rival, Fikile Mbalula, said As the ANC, we are yet to release a comprehensive response to the situation. We call it a situation because it's not very clearly defined. As the ANC, we are not aware of it until reports surfaced in the media on Sunday. We are taken aback by these reports because neither the Deputy President nor anyone in government informed the ANC about this situation. The Treasurer General of the ANC, Gwen Ramakgopa, and the ANC's Northern Cape chairperson referred to this alleged assassination attempt as fake news. So it seems that there was a lot of skepticism within the ANC as to this, and suspicions that Mashatile was simply claiming this to boost his own internal campaign for the ANC. Yesterday, News 24 said that they had gotten a hold of the South African Police Service ballistics report as to what had struck the car, and that report apparently, according to the reporting, says that it's very unlikely that what hit the car was a deliberate assassination attempt. There may have been shotgun pellets, but they do not appear to have been deliberately aimed at the car. Now, I don't entirely understand what happened there in the story. If you read the details, there's a security guard who works close to where the shooting probably took place, who claims that sometimes in the nearby informal settlement after payday, basically people let off guns, which is not very comforting. But the point being that might have been some sort of accidental thing rather than a deliberate assassination attempt. Marius, what do you make of all this? I mean, it's kind of a slightly bizarre story, and I don't think it's really worked out for Paul Mashatile, considering his own party comrades seem to have immediately suggested this is all fake news.
Yeah, and also if it was a real attempt at assassination, it seems pretty ham-fisted. Just shooting a couple of shotgun pellets at a big motorcade. And I don't know if people saw the recent footage of Paul Mashatile's motorcade going up the wrong way on a road in North Riding. That guy's got a huge motorcade. It's probably like 10 or 15 cars. So you don't even know what car Mashatile's in. So,
yeah, you need like
you need
like a full-on sort of army brigade to take down his motorcade.
Exactly. But mind you, it was so ham-fisted, it does make you think that it is probably from someone in the ANC, because they do things half-assed, and so the party that can't find its bum with both hands would maybe be doing something. Now I'm being facetious, but I do think this is it sounds all very fishy to me, and it does. I'd be very surprised if this was a real assassination attempt. But if it is, I really hope it isn't, actually, because this would be very bad for our politics if this kind of thing starts happening at national level. We already have a major problem with political assassinations, especially in KwaZulu-Natal. It's actually to be a councillor, an ANC councillor or IFP councillor in KwaZulu-Natal is probably the most dangerous job in South Africa. It's more dangerous than on a per capita basis. It's more dangerous than being a farmer, than being a policeman, than practically any job, because people are always getting murdered for political positions. And it'll be very dangerous for South Africa if this kind of thing starts, if this cancer sort of metastasizes in other provinces or on a national level. And that's actually our former colleague, Gareth van Onselen, always makes the point that these political assassinations in KwaZulu-Natal is sort of South Africa's forgotten crisis. Nobody really talks about it. It emerges every now and again, but nobody really makes a big noise about it. And it's not something to just forget about, because I do think if we're not careful, that kind of thing will become more common in other provinces and at national level. And while I think this whole thing with Paul Mashatile is a lot of rubbish, it's not something we can discount in the future, and it's definitely something we need to keep an eye on as South Africans, and something the security services do actually need to take quite seriously.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. If this was a genuine assassination attempt, it would be a crisis. If someone is trying to kill the deputy president due to his own internal party stuff, you are in big trouble as a society. It means your politics is actually on the verge of disintegrating into just kind of gangsterism and murder and warfare. But luckily, as you say, the evidence is not very strong here that this was in fact an assassination attempt. But what's also kind of a bit worrying is that, if he is claiming this and it turns out to not be true, it's sort of almost creating a justification for someone to try and do the same thing, but this time to Fikile Mbalula. And that would be really bad. John, what do you make of this whole story? I mean, it's kind of interesting watching the ANC's internal battle here. Firstly, because as per usual, it's not always entirely clear who, where everyone is in the ANC, because it's such a sort of opaque organization sometimes, and how there's lots of little factions that are all whispering different things to the media, so it's difficult to work out the state of play. But I don't know. It seems that there's remarkably little that each of the main candidates seems to have to offer here. Fikile Mbalula, I think, is definitely a better potential future leader of the ANC, but he's still not, he's not going to shoot the lights out or change the party's direction in a radical way, I don't think. And Paul Mashatile is, he's dogged by some corruption allegations. There's all these things against him for the time that people in his motorcade beat those people on the side of the road. It's just, I think, speaks to the fact that without Ramaphosa, the ANC sort of seems to be twisting in the wind somewhat. Or am I just missing something? I don't know. What's your take on this, John?
Yeah, I agree with your assessment on this. So observation one is, why is Paul Mashatile always in the news? Because of his cars. His motorcade stopping to beat up a motorist by the side of the motorway, going up the wrong way, up a road, getting shot at. That's all quite weird. What was also weird about the shooting story is that I believe the shooting apparently happened on the 30th of March. So if, there was an attempt to kill the deputy president of the country, usually you'd expect the one or other headline. And maybe, for him to mention this as an aside to somebody, the police, for example. And it appears it took like 2 or 3 weeks for this even to become known. So I think in this case, Fikile Mbalula is absolutely right to downplay it and say, look, we don't quite know what's going on here. If this was a serious attempt, surely, we would have heard about it before. So, let's treat it as to be confirmed. Let's see what the police say, etc., etc. I think that's the right approach. I don't think this was a serious attempt. But what I found interesting is that in one of the pieces we read in preparation for the show, at the end of the piece, there is a sort of commentary from Mashatile, and he said that he dismissed assertions that there was a succession battle. He said the focus should be on rebuilding the ANC and not campaigning. So he points out that the ANC had suffered a setback. It needed to regain people's confidence. And he says, now that we have got 40% in the last election, so if we focus on campaigning, the ANC won't survive. We as leaders must focus on building our branches and renewing the ANC. In doing so, we'll have a vibrant organization that perhaps will nominate us when the time comes. But if we don't build this organization, there will be no way to nominate us. And like the thing you must notice, there's the dog that didn't bark, which is that this is entirely internally focused. Like, he's only thinking about inside the ANC. There's no mention of economic growth. There's no mention of the voters. There's no mention of, creating jobs, of delivering services, of producing results. There's nothing of that. It's only, we have to rebuild our organization and make sure that we've got the support internally. And I think that is quite telling. That probably is reflective of the state of the ANC at the moment.
Yeah, exactly. I think, that speaks to my point about how they don't have a theory of what's going wrong. It's sort of the theory seems to be, well, our branches aren't working well enough. That's why voters aren't voting for us. And you sort of scratch your head and you're like, well, I mean, I'm sure that's a factor, but that ain't the reason.
Exactly. Exactly right.
Marius, final thoughts from you?
No, I think John just makes a good point about where the ANC is at. It's become a very inward-looking party, not really looking at the future of the country. And I read Rory Stewart's autobiography last year. He was a Tory MP and so on, and he was in the extended cabinet there, and like he made the points that him and a lot of other people in the Tories, whatever you think about them, knew that they had the future of people's lives in their hands. The decisions they made were really going to affect people's future earnings and the lives their kids were going to have and so on. I don't think there are very few people in the ANC who think like that. They don't think that their decisions are actually going to have real material impacts on people, no matter in South Africa, no matter if they're black, white, whether they benefited from apartheid or not, whatever the case is. They don't think like that. It's just about what they can. It's very short-termist thinking, I think. And I think a lot of political parties are probably guilty of that. But I think with Paul Mashatile, what he was saying, all he's thinking about is what's happening in the ANC internally. As John says, not about what can get the economy going. And these people, for better or worse, make decisions that impact all of us. And unfortunately, sometimes you have to think it seems like the ANC is phoning it in, if they even have access to a phone.
And on that note, let's call it to an end. Thank you very much for listening. I will not be here next week. I am on holiday, but Makone Majo will be standing in for me as the host on Tuesday and Wednesday, and Marius will be hosting next week, Friday. So thank you to them for agreeing to step into the breach. I hope you all have a wonderful week, and I hope you all enjoy the public holidays ahead of us. This is one of the best things about being South Africans. We get this big glut of public holidays quite close to each other in April and May. It is truly glorious, even if it's not great for the economy. But anyway, thank you very much for listening, and we will see you all soon on the Daily Friend Show. Cheers.